Hello, and welcome to our International Servant Leader Pre-Summit Series with our guest presenter, Dr. Jim Lemoine. My name is Mariah Weddle, and I will be your host today. Before we begin, I would like to briefly go through our timeline presented on the slide in front of you for your reference. Following Dr. Lemoine's presentation, we will move into a breakout session, which I will explain in detail later in the session. To conclude our pre-summit series, we will move into a Q&A session where questions that we receive from you all during our presentation will be consolidated and presented to Dr. Lemoine. We encourage you to post any questions you may have for Dr. Lemoine in the group chat throughout his presentation. We are honored and privileged to have servant leaders from all
So I think Mariah got muted. At least I couldn't hear what she said, but I am going to assume that it's my turn. She can nod or shake her head. No. Hello! Sorry for that very awkward introduction. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this advanced event for the International Servant Leader Summit. Hi, my name is Jim, and it is really an honor to be with you today. I'm here to talk to you about servant leadership today, but I'm looking through the participant list as I just did. I feel like I'm not 100% worthy. I see some names of some people on this list who certainly know servant leadership a lot better than I do. I see people on like famous people like Don Frick, Dick Pieper, Clayton Cottrell, Tom Thibodeau, and I don't want to get people excited, but I could have swore I saw Santa Claus as I was going through the video feeds. So lots of really important people. I see in the chat people saying lost sound. Can someone give me a thumbs up? Can you hear me? Are we good on sound? We're good. Excellent. So they showed me how to do something very neat with my PowerPoint that Mariah just did. Oh, wow, look at you guys. You people seem to be in a terrific mood this morning. Don't worry, I'll take care of that for you. Not a problem at all. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint going for you with my face really cute in the lower right-hand corner. Hey, look, it's me, and I'm on my PowerPoint. I've only got so far to go. Great. So we are here today to talk about this whole servant leadership thing. And what you see on the screen behind me is a picture of a guy named Bob Greenleaf, who 50 years ago to the year 1970 published a little essay called The Servant as Leader and really launched the modern servant leadership movement, which a lot of us are big fans of. Some of you are real experts on. I'm just a student of it. I'm a professor here at the State University of New York in Buffalo, where it's snowing today. Very Christmassy, but very uncomfortable for this boy from New Orleans. We're all big fans of the servant leadership. At least I assume we are. Maybe you came here to heckle me, and that's fine too. But believe it or not, if you're a fan, there are skeptics of servant leadership. There are people who say that this doesn't work, that this isn't realistic, that this couldn't possibly be what the world needs. And here's a fun fact. If you Google skepticism, one of the first pictures that pops up is this one, which I think is an amazing picture of what skepticism really is. I recently co-wrote a chapter for a book, actually a couple of chapters for a book for the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. I don't know if it's going to let me show it to you, but it's called Inspiration for Servant Leaders. Now, I'm not trying to make any money. I get no money from selling this. It all goes straight to the nonprofit Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. But in one of these chapters, we talked quite a bit about the myths of servant leadership and whether they're true and whether they're not. Don't have a lot of time with you today, but I wanted to go through 3 of them with you and just tell you what the evidence says around them and maybe hopefully give you a new way to think about some of these things. And the first one, and one that I've heard a lot, is that servant leadership is soft. This is actually one of the very first presentations I ever did on servant leadership as I began my academic journey. I was at a hospital, of all places, and believe it or not, after I got done, a gentleman in the back of the room, I'm assuming he was an important doctor because he was wearing a white lab coat, and I always assume people in white lab coats are important. He stood up and said, "Well, that all sounds really good, but everyone knows that servant leadership is just soft. We don't need that kind of thing. Nobody needs to be a Care Bear." Those were his exact words. I'll never forget them. And that got me thinking a lot about servant leadership and about Care Bears. See, I wanted to rebut this assertion that servant leadership was like a Care Bear, that it was soft, but I'm a guy. I didn't play with Care Bears growing up. I have two sons. They didn't play with Care Bears growing up. So I started researching Care Bears to see how maybe we could relate this to servant leadership. Now, what you hopefully see behind me on the screen is a picture of, I thought this was Sunshine Bear, but it turns out it's Funshine Bear. They all have names like this. And apparently, for those of you who are not familiar with Care Bears, it's this anthropomorphic group of tribally oriented ursines that tattoo their names on their stomachs. And there's hundreds of them, which is really weird because there's only like one guy, but there's hundreds of these Care Bears, and they all are about different names and emotions. And I thought if servant leadership is like a Care Bear, well, which Care Bear would servant leadership be like? And I searched and searched on the internet, and I'm no expert at this. I found a picture of one that maybe might be a little closer than this one to servant leadership, sometimes at least. I couldn't find a name for this. Maybe some of you guys are experts at Care Bears and you know which one I'm talking about, if anybody knows which one this is. The point I'm trying to make is that servant leadership is not all sunshine and roses and ponies and rainbows and things like that. It's not soft like that. And this goes right back to the words of Robert Greenleaf. And this is from his first collection of essays, Servant Leadership, A Journey into the Nature of Legitimate Power. Take a look at these quotes. First line, am I sensitive to the needs and aspirations of all who may be affected by what I say, think, and do? And I like to stop there and ask people to think about that for a second. Think about the way when you were first entering the work world, the adult world, you looked at your boss. Think about the way you looked at your boss's boss. Think about the way you think about your CEO or people, who are a level or two above you. Odds are you kind of put them on a pedestal. Odds are you watch them very carefully. Odds are you think, wow, if I could be like that someday, that would be amazing. Think of the leaders you respect. Now you might be in this position as a leader. Maybe you're in this position now, maybe you'll be it in the future, maybe you want to be in this position. When we are in these positions, whether we like it or not, we're role models. We have people watching us. In fact, sometimes when I'm doing a big corporate event and I've got lots of people from a company in the room with me, remember back before COVID and like the first Bush administration when we could do things like that, I'll notice that people in the room are sitting the same way the CEO is. For instance, if the CEO is sitting with their legs propped up, I'll notice a lot of people doing the same thing. We even unconsciously, we will model what our leaders do. So if you call yourself a leader, if you want to be a leader, are you sensitive to the needs and aspirations of everyone who's affected by every little thing you do? And then being sensitive, Greenleaf wrote, are you willing to say the words and take the actions that build constructive tension? Boy, I love that phrase. Authentic conversations, sometimes difficult feedback, pushing people. See, the servant leaders knows that if people keep doing what they've always done, they're going to keep getting what they've always gotten. Greenleaf wrote a lot about we need to push people to the next level. We need to push people just a little bit beyond where they think their limits are because they don't see their limits the same way they should. Am I willing to say, I mean, there's the big quote right there. There's the money quote for those who say that servant leadership is just soft. Am I willing to say, do it now instead of do it tomorrow, it'll be easier? Greenleaf did not write about ponies and roses and always saying yes and always giving followers everything they want. He talked about giving them what they need to prosper, what they thrive, what they need to grow, both in their current position and in their future positions, and just as human beings. That's really the kind of thing that Greenleaf is about. And really, there's nothing soft about that. There's nothing soft at all about pushing people, about saying, I believe you can do more. You sold $1,000 worth of widgets today? Great. I think tomorrow you can do 1,100. You think you can get me that report by 5 o'clock Friday? Fantastic. I'll expect it by 4 o'clock Friday. We're always growing, little by little, bit by bit, not unachievable stretch goals, but let's just get a little bit higher than where we've been, where we were before, so on and so forth. One of my favorite writers, this is a picture of Jean Phillips, perhaps better known to you as Dear Abby. And here's one of my favorite quotes from her. Sometimes the most important conversations are the most difficult to engage in. We've actually done research studies here at the State University of New York in Buffalo, where we found one of the most important attributes of an entrepreneur's success is whether or not they're willing to have difficult conversations with their employees. And this was really interesting for entrepreneurs because, usually very small team, you can't afford to lose people, especially in this day and age. But no, being too nice can actually hurt you. And the servant leader knows that. They know I'm not being nice to be nice. I'm being nice because this is a person worthy of respect. But because they're worthy of respect, sometimes they're worth a little more honesty. They're worth a few more difficult conversations. So no, servant leadership is not always soft. If you think servant leadership is always soft, well, then you and I have different definitions of servant leadership. And more importantly, you've got a different definition than the one that's been written about by its founder, Bob Greenleaf. A second myth and I've just been talking about this, servant leadership is just about being nice to followers. Like, that's the emphasis. If you go to SHRM's website, if you go to Wikipedia, if you go to lots of websites on the internet, you say, well, servant leadership's all about doing the right thing by followers. And that kind of follows in line with what I just said, that's what sets it apart. That's the big differentiator. That's what it focuses on. And I'm not really sure that that's true either. And let me tell you one of my favorite stories. This is actually from my TED Talk that I think illustrates why. On the screen in front of you, you see a picture of a man with a stellar mustache. I mean, I'm 1/8 Native American. I'm incapable of growing. I get jealous. And I think, you know, Mariah, you'd look fantastic with a mustache like that. I mean, wouldn't she? Wow. This is a picture of Joshua Lewis Chamberlain, who in the 19th century was an academic. Civil War started. He was so moved by the cause, and he was up in Maine. I should have added that. He was so moved by the cause that he signed up to be an officer, and he became a commanding officer. And I want you to imagine, as I tell this story, picture yourself in his shoes. Picture yourself with those long, beautiful, glorious, flowing mustaches rolling down your face. And imagine you're in the situation that I'm about to describe to you. It is July 2nd of 1863. It's the eve of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, if you think about it, Gettysburg's in Pennsylvania. The Civil War is between the North and the South. So if we're fighting all the way up in Pennsylvania, well, the good guys aren't doing well. The Union's doing poorly. This is the moment where it looks like the Confederates are absolutely going to win this thing. You, Josh Chamberlain, command the 20th Maine. You're considered the weak link in the Union Army. Started out with 1,600 men, down to about 250 because, well, war is hell. You know, lots of rough stuff going on, abandonment, stress, and attrition. You tell high command that you're ready to fight in the battle tomorrow. They say, okay, we need you to defend this point of particular strategic importance called Little Round Top. You go scout out the position. You say, there's no way I have enough men for that. I need more men. High command says, we don't have any more men. You say, you don't understand. I've got to have more men. They say, nope, there's no more men. You finally say, it's impossible to guard this point without more men. And so they send you 120 mutineers from the 2nd Maine and order them to join you. He said as he leaned back so you could see the word join. And here's the story for the 2nd Maine. It's really a kind of a tragic comic story that could never, ever happen in today's world of government mishaps. Basically, these men in the 2nd Maine, most of them couldn't read, right? They signed contracts for military service. They just put an X on it. They thought they were signing a contract for 2 years of military service, but due to a government bureaucratic mix-up, they accidentally signed a contract for 3 years and they never knew it. And now at this point, the 2 years are up and they're about to go home to their friends, to their families, to their farms, to their lives, to their wives. And men with guns stop them and say, no, you got to fight for 1 more year. No, I don't. I signed a 2-year contract. Yes, you do. It's a 3-year contract. These men got bamboozled. They were cheated. They thought they could go home. Now they can't. So they're ready to walk out the door. You, Josh Chamberlain, need to get them to fight for you. You tell high command, what am I going to do with 120 mutineers? High command says, well, just shoot them if they disobey you. You can do that. Now, again, I asked you, put yourself in Josh Chamberlain's shoes. You've got to defend this point. You cannot do it without these 120 men fighting at your side. So I'm going to shut up for just 4 seconds so I can think, based on everything you know about leadership, based on everything you've experienced from your managers and your coaches and your parents and your religious leaders. If you were in this position, you're giving a speech to them, what do you think you would say? I see some thoughtful faces out there. What would you really say? You know, I'll tell you, I usually, when I do this, I do a big, much longer version of this and in person, you know, in non-COVID world. Once I was doing this presentation at a toy company, and a lady in the back of the room, after I said, well, what would you say? She stood up and she was one of those ladies who was dressed in pink from head to toe, even had a pink hat. And the first thing she said was, well, if I was in that situation, I would shoot one of them in the head before I even started talking just to make sure I had their attention. I said, wow, you make toys for my kids. That explains a lot. So my students are usually shocked when I tell them that there are no surviving clips of this speech from 1863 on Apple Video or on YouTube or anything like that. They offer to look for me and say, I'm sure it's out there. And I say, no, I don't think you're going to find it. But what we do have are diaries and journals and embedded newspaper reporters. And we're able to kind of piece it together. We don't have the exact words probably, but we kind of know, apparently it was a very short speech in real life. And here, I'm going to read it to you. This is about what it is. It wasn't more than a minute or so. Josh Chamberlain said, I've been told that if you don't come with me and serve in this Union Army, I can shoot you. But you know, I won't do that. not to good Maine men. We're down below half strength. The Confederates are coming and we need you, no doubt about that. Many of us have come and served and died because it was the right thing to do. We're an army going out to set other men free, and what we're fighting for in the end is for each other. We don't know the future, we can't plan for it much, but the cause for which we fight is higher, our thought is wider, and that thought is our power. But here's what I think. If we lose this fight, the war will be over. We'll lose the whole damn war. But if you choose to come with us, I'll be personally grateful. That was the whole speech. And as a student of leadership, as a student of servant leadership, it's amazing to me. I mean, if you think about being a boss, you've got a lot of power over your employees, right? I mean, you can give them a bad shift, you can give them a bad evaluation, you can fail to promote them, you can even fire them, you can ruin their lives. If you're like Steve Jobs, you can even blacklist them, but you can't kill them. Josh Chamberlain had the biggest power over his followers that we could possibly imagine. Unless you work with the mafia, you don't have that kind of power, I hope, over your followers. But he gave it away with the very first line. He said, I won't do that. I won't use this power. I'm not going to. And he did that. He wrote, I did that because I don't want them to fight for me because they have to. I want them to fight for us because they want to. And all 120 of those men signed up that night. And if you don't know the story of Little Round Top, it's a pretty inspiring story. But the short version is they were doing fantastic until they ran out of ammunition. And while most of us, myself included, would have probably run like hell at a time like that, they didn't. Instead, somebody called for the bayonet charge, which completely took the Confederates by surprise and broke the ranks, allowing them to flank another unit, set off a chain reaction, a domino effect, if you will, that ended up winning the battle for the Union. And that battle was the turning point of the Civil War. So why am I going to this about servant leadership? I was supposed to talk about it's more than just followers. Well, because this is a great example of servant leadership to me. Take a look at this. He could have coerced. He could have told them, you have to do this or I will kill you. He said, no, this is not what I want to do. I want to persuade them, which is exactly what Bob Greenleaf wrote, The Servant Leader does. Anybody can coerce someone to do something, but it takes a true leader to make someone want to do something. That's a great line from Dwight Eisenhower. He persuaded the men beyond to do it. Why did they do it? Because the cause was noble and worth doing. It's something, and think about where you work. Think about what you do. Is your cause noble and worth doing? I like to tell the story. I had two banks in a room that I was speaking to once, and I asked them, is what you do noble and worth doing? And one of the banks stood up and said, well, not really. We do investment products, we do savings account, we make money. That's what we do. And then another bank who had the exact same goods and services stood up and said, well, of course, what we do is noble and worth doing. We help people afford their dreams. We help people buy their first car, buy their first home, retire in comfort. What could be more noble than that? Two different banks doing the exact same things, but it's all in how the leaders talked about it. It's how they framed it. This is why we exist. Is it just to make profit or is it to make the world a better place? Josh Chamberlain persuaded them they had a better future if they came together for the goal. He respected them. He helped them. He understood that they had been wronged. It would have been easy for him to say, oh, well, I'm going to let you go. You don't have to fight. We've done you wrong. He said, no. I want to help you, but I need you to help others. And by that unique approach to leadership, turned the tide of a war, changed the course of the nation. That was the moment that changed the course of the battle. That battle changed the course of the Civil War. The Civil War changed the course of the United States of America. That's the power of servant leadership right there. And it's not just about being nice to followers, because if it was just about being nice to followers, he would have said, you guys do what you want to do. You guys do what you need to do. Instead, it was about, let's make the world a better place. Let's come together and make the world a better place. And I need your help to do that. This is my definition that I use a lot for servant leadership, which is tricky because, Greenleaf never left us a solid, concrete definition of servant leadership. He actually laughed about that. He thought that was a good thing, but I feel like I need one. I like to define things. I'm a geek. I'm a professor. Servant leadership is humbly influencing and developing others. I think that's just leadership. We're influencing and developing others towards continuous and meaningful improvement for all stakeholders. And I have written in a bunch of academic papers, that's what makes servant leadership different. Continuous and meaningful improvement for all stakeholders. And that includes your followers. Yes, they're part of that. I'm not saying they're not, but also other employees in the organization who maybe don't report to you, your customers, your partners, your vendors, the broader community, and of course the organization itself and its shareholders. You got to be making money too. Greenleaf wrote, You know, if you're serving today without making any profit, well, then you won't be around tomorrow to be serving either. You've got to do all of these. So stakeholders include, and you may be thinking, how does one leader service all of these? This isn't realistic. This isn't what business is about. Well, I'd say, here's a picture of some people who disagree with you. This is a picture of some of the CEOs from what's called the Business Roundtable. It's a group of 200 CEOs of the biggest companies in the world. You'll see Amazon and Google and Apple, JP Morgan, GE, I mean, they're all represented in there. On August 19th of 2019, they released a statement called The Purpose of a Corporation. And I'm talking for-profits here. And they said that no longer can we only focus on profit. We have to keep focusing on that, but no longer can we only do that. We also have to focus on, well, our customers, the good of our employees, the good of our partners and vendors, and the good of our communities, making the world a better place. They were basically arguing for the servant leadership approach, which brings me to the third myth of servant leadership that I want to talk to you about, that it gets in the way of profit. And this one to me is actually the most reasonable for people to think about. I mean, how could you do all of this and still make money or accomplish your mission if you're a nonprofit? Wouldn't you be pulled in too many directions? Is that even possible? And that comes to a mindset that's been around ever since an economist named Milton Friedman wrote an article in the New York Times Sunday magazine back in 1970, coincidentally, the exact same year that Greenleaf wrote his Servant as Leader, in which he argued that the only purpose of a business had to be profit, making money for the owners. He said that's the ethical thing. In fact, he argued stakeholders, shareholders give a business, they invest in a business, they expect it to make more money. Whereas Greenleaf said that the most successful businesses are going to make more money. The most successful leaders are going to inspire their employees by focusing on a lot of different things, by taking care of them, by taking care of customers, by prioritizing even communities, societies, trying to do the right thing. And there have been debates about this for decades. Well, I'm here to tell you that there have been studies that try to address this. I mean, really, what is the truth? Is it possible at all for a business? Let's stay with business, because that's the hardest case here. I think it's easy for a nonprofit to say we'll be a servant leader. Is it harder for a for-profit? How can we make money through this? Greenleaf said you could. Greenleaf said keep doing everything you've been doing to make a profit, but you got to add all this stuff on top of it, and you make a profit by doing this stuff. And let me tell you, research found that this is not the right model. What I'm showing you, I was kind of hoping this would be the right model. This isn't the right model, but this is. It turns out that by taking care of you, and you didn't need me to tell you this, this is what we hope is true. This is what we think is true. But I'm telling you right here, in a replicated study of 600 of the Fortune 1000, researchers have found and replicated that businesses that take care of their employees, take care of their customers, take care of their communities, and do the right thing make more money. I call it the paradox of leadership. And it's the big evidence for servant leadership that it works for businesses. The businesses that take care of employees, customers, and communities, they actually make more money in the long term than the ones that don't. Here's a partial list. There have been over 200 peer-reviewed and replicated studies on, does this servant leadership thing really work? Or is it a waste of time? Is it possible to do all these things? And what they found, that even while servant leaders focus on making the community better place, helping their employees lead more complete lives, helping their customers really succeed, it also leads to job performance, going above and beyond at work, creativity. The employees of servant leaders have greater decision-making skill. My own research found that. Intrinsic motivation to work hard for the business. Organizational commitment, I want to stay, I don't want to quit. Firm financial performance, stock valuation, return on assets. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is only a partial list. Again, over 200 peer-reviewed, replicated papers have been published that show that servant leadership works. And in fact, it seems to work better than many other approaches to leadership. I was going to post a file in here, actually, but it seems like my option to do so has disappeared. So maybe we'll try to do that after the breakout. So I was gonna post a file to the chat, an article that we recently published alongside the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, a few of us reviewing these hundreds of papers and just showing, here's the evidence for servant leaders affecting customers and employees and communities positively while building big profits. So these three myths that we talked about in this book, Inspiration for Servant Leaders, that it's soft, that it's just about helping followers, that there's no way to do all this while building profit. There's research evidence that shows these are 100% false. In fact, I'm sorry? Oh, no, I just lost my chain of thought, but I see I'm just about out of time anyway. So let me just lead with this. If you'd like to learn more about servant leadership, why it works, how it works, what are the steps you can take to be more of a servant leader, to become a stronger servant leader, I invite you to join us, where we'll go so in depth on this at the International Servant Leadership Summit this June. And that's my email address. I work with the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. I'm actually a board member, a trustee, as Mr. Pieper is a trustee emeritus, as well as a researcher with our University at Buffalo Center for Leadership and Organizational Effectiveness. If you'd like more information on any of the research I talked about, the servant leadership stuff, please feel free to reach out to me. And while you're in your breakout rooms, we're going to try to put this article I just talked about that summarizes all this research with citations, so you'll have access to it in the chat. Mariah, back to you.
So much, Dr. Lemoine, for your insightful presentation. As previewed, we will now move into our breakout session portion of the series. You will have two options during this portion of the summit: to enter into a breakout room accompanied by a small group of servant leaders from around the world, or you can decline the breakout room option and stay in the main room, where a conversation will be facilitated by several servant leadership experts. We encourage your transition into a breakout room for rich conversation and connection. In the breakout rooms, we would invite you to employ our format provided. We would ask that you first begin with a 2-breath introduction. For example, my name is Mariah Weddle. I am a co-facilitator of the International Servant Leader Summit, and I have a Master's of Servant Leadership, and am currently a spiritual care specialist for the Guest House of Milwaukee. After introductions, we would then ask that you assign a facilitator and a recorder and begin a rich discussion on takeaways from the presentation. To conclude the breakout session, we would ask that the recorder post in the group chat one insight from your group discussion. Thank you all again for your engagement, and enjoy your discussion. I will see you all back in 40 minutes. Thank you.
As you're getting ready to go to the breakout rooms, I was just able to upload the article I was talking about to the chat. You should see it in the chat box just above Mary Jo Waldorf's message. If you'd like to grab that, please do so.
There are some people that came in after the presentation. I don't know where they end up when that happens. Is anybody on this group?
There are 45 currently in our main room currently.
So they're all muted. Jim and Tom should be unmuted. So Tom, what did you think? You've been very quiet this morning.
the word silent comes from the same letters as the word listen. And I find that in these conversations, deep listening is valuable for myself and for others. And so I very much like the idea of what are the myths that we have, but I also think the other way in which you balance it, what's really true about servant leadership?
Well, it's all true, don't you think? And we've all experienced all these things work. Why do some managers take pieces of it, but not all of it? And then that discredits them. What do you think, Jim?
Well, it's hard to do all at the same time, and that's why. And there's something in my field of study that we call the rule of 1/8, which is that when it comes to things like good leadership and good team building, half of the organizations out there, they just don't buy it. They don't think it really works, and that only leaves 50% who can do it right. Then of those 50% who want to do it, they don't know how to do it. So they throw a lot of stuff at the wall to see if it sticks, and it doesn't work, and eventually they give up. So that only leaves another half. So now we're down to 25%. And then of that 25% that's left that really wants to do it, and they've got a good idea of how to do it, they just try to do one or two things just to try a little. And then when that doesn't work immediately, the next day they're like, oh, this is too much work. It's far too much effort to put all of our efforts and do everything. And then we lose half. So then you've only got 1/8, basically 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2, 12.5% of organizations and leaders who actually do all this stuff. I mean, servant leadership, there's a lot of different models of it, right? There's the Spears model, there's a Don Frick's model, which is a really good one. There's the research model from Bob Lydon, which we use a lot, but it's all like 10 competencies or 7 competencies. It's never just one, and it's never just 2, and it's hard to, and some of them are really difficult to do. For instance, one of them in the model I use is putting others first. And that's easy to say, and that's really, really hard to do. And whenever I measure these with the companies I do research with, leaders always get the lowest scores in that. And they'll come back to me and go, well, of course we got the lowest scores on that. That's unreasonable to ask me to put other people's career growth, put other people's ambitions before my own. And my response is always the same. If you don't put them first, why should they put the team first? Why should they put the organization first? Servant leadership's hard.
What do you think, Tom?
Well, I think he's absolutely correct. We're talking about the development of virtue and character. And how do you develop virtue and character? And I would tell you this quite honestly, when we start to use the terms soft or easy, I think what happens is that we're trying to respond to men. I think that we were saying, well, it's not hard, it's not tough. I mean, so that I think even in terms of our language, how do you develop character and virtue if you don't have somebody who's teaching you, coaching you, guiding you? And as we know, most men are pretty much lonely, do not have those kind of relationships where they're taking guidance, looking for a mentor. I'm just gonna kind of make it on my own. And so I think that it gets right to the heart of the matter. And so what happens, we want to dismiss that which we think is difficult, so we call it soft, easy.
It's interesting you bring up gender because that's something that I think servant leadership really has something to say about. There's a paper I published last year that I was really proud of to try to dive into that. There's a lot of people who believe that a lot of the problems we have with leadership based on just what Tom just said, that it's got to be hard, it's got to be independent, it's got to be rough, it's got to be tough. That a lot of that has to do with the stereotypes we have for men and women. When we think of a leader, just consciously, subconsciously, we tend to think of this charismatic, usually a man, right? And it's usually based on role models we had as kids or things we saw on TV and the movies. I mean, it's not a coincidence that if you think back in most old movies or TV shows, from Star Wars to Scooby-Doo to modern times, Captain America and the Avengers, it's always a guy, right? And we think that to be aligned with these masculine stereotypes, well, leaders have to be tough, leaders have to be hard. And as a result of that, women have, research has found, an unfair advantage in leadership because they don't align with these tough, right? They're more the carers, the nurturers. But research has found that servant leadership actually inverts that, because servant leadership is effective leadership by caring and nurturing, by helping, by being a little more soft. It's not just soft, but by being a little more soft. It doesn't always have to be tough and yelling and screaming and independent and assertive. It can be more team-based and caring. And we find that not only is servant leadership uniquely powerful, but women don't face any of those disadvantages because they're able to be true to themselves. It's a style of leadership that lets you credibly be a little bit softer, that lets you credibly be the caretaker, be the nurturer, be the person who says, you know what, we're gonna go out and we're gonna make the world a better place, and we're gonna help people, and it doesn't matter if we're for profit. That's what we're gonna do. Sorry if I'm rambling. I get excited when I talk about the research.
Well, you should be excited because I think it's so important, and it's a critical conversation. Again, when we go back to leadership, how often are we citing in terms of military leaders?
But even then, I mean, like take the Josh Chamberlain example I gave you. Dwight Eisenhower, I usually talk about him a lot. You know, he has the best certainly, you know, one of our most successful military leaders of the last 100 years. But his definition of leadership is the best I've ever heard. Leadership is getting people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. Not because they have to, not because they were ordered to, not because they're doing it for their country, not because they're expected to, not because they could get fired, not because they could get shot, but because they genuinely want to do it. I did a presentation for the US Coast Guard not long ago, and it was amazing. You know, I think we've got in many cases the stereotype of the military from maybe watching shows like MASH or old war movies, the drill sergeant, things like that, but the military has really evolved. And it's not about you're going to do what I said because I have a higher rank than you, because I have a position, because I have a fancy title, because I got some stars on my jacket. It's because we're all in this together. We're protecting the world. We're making it a better place. And that's a much more solid approach to long-term motivation and influence, I think.
Well, and again, I think that one of the things that's helped in terms of the military is the number of women, and how the military has made a conscious effort, not only in terms of segregation, but also in terms of levels of incorporation, recognizing people's gifts and abilities and talents.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And you don't have time to do that if you're just yelling at people and telling them what to do. You don't care.
Exactly.
They're just a cog in the machine. Did we lose Mr. Pieper? He went dark on my screen.
Well, he probably went out to visit somebody else.
Room, and there's a number of people in your room, but they're not here. They're just sitting there listening.
Well, are there any questions or comments? I saw that Mona Lisa Battaglia said she apologized she can't be active watching during clinic. Does that mean like you're skipping school playing hooky? Because as a professor, I approve. I did want to add that one of our physicians said difficulties with my servant leadership because he feels I should present as a harder personality to get things done. Well, there's what Tom was just talking about. Most of the staff comes to me for assistance, ways to find creative solutions to longstanding issues. After 11 years, this physician has come to realize and communicate to me personally that he finally sees the value. Finally, amen. Yeah, there you go. Sometimes it takes a while to break people down, right? I did a study in a call center, which you'd think, you know, it's really fast-paced and busy environment, and where I didn't think people would be too receptive to servant leadership. And what I found was for the first few months, they didn't trust the servant leader. They're like, what's your ulterior motive? Why are you, someone actually said this in an interview, why are they pretending to care about me? Like they couldn't imagine, they'd had so many bad bosses over the course of their lives. They couldn't imagine a manager who actually cared enough to say, you know, how are you doing? What personal problems are you having at home? How can I help you to be better? And it took a few months to get past that. So it does take time sometimes because this isn't what we expect. This is not what the average manager is. This is not what the average, I hate to use the word leader because someone who leads like that is not a leader. They're a manager, they're a supervisor telling people what to do, but that's what most people are used to. And habits are strong. It takes a while to break people out of them. Teresa said she saw a few questions in the chat, wondering if you might address them. Let me scroll back up and see. Let's see. Oh, here's a great one from Don Frick. Jack Lowe, CEO of TD Industries in Dallas, and a great guy. If you haven't met him, once told me, servant leadership is like Zen. You don't do it to make more money. You do it because it's the right thing to do. If that's your motive, you'll make more money. And the research backs him up. That's the neat thing. You talk to people who've been practicing servant leadership, they know this stuff. And then us researchers, we take years to just verify what they already knew. but it's nice to have it verified because it's nice to have evidence to go to the people who don't know it. Of those 200 CEOs in the round table, do any of them specifically name Greenleaf servant leadership as a personal or organization operating principle? Only a couple. Delta, Intel, Zappos is a part of Amazon, although they're not on their own. I don't think Southwest is in the business roundtable, but there are a few. Tom, I've been talking for a while. Anything to throw in?
Well, I think that where you get to is levels of intentionality. And so if I want to take on it, and you and I have both worked with organizations that want to bring us in and talk to them about servant leadership because they want to become more profitable. If you're taking on servant leadership with the intention of making more profit, you'll fail miserably. If you take it on because you believe it's right and just and good, then you'll do well. And it'll be immeasurable in terms of what the benefits may be. But we have kind of this linear way of thinking of a cause and effect, rather than how is it that I spend the time developing a culture in which people can be more fully themselves. One of the things that Greenleaf was very strong on is that all of leadership is about maturity. How do we help people grow up and take responsibility for their lives? And what I really appreciated about your research, not only for their lives and their company, but for their communities. And I think this is one of the things that people forget, that Greenleaf was really talking about a shift that takes place in the community and in the society, where leadership, not just to have good businesses, not just to have good individual leaders, but have healthy communities. And I think this is what's really extraordinary as we look at what's happening in terms of this pandemic. The places that are able to manage the pandemic in some way are healthy communities where they have healthy leaders. And I think the opposite is true. The places that are having really the difficulties, oftentimes, where are the leaders in their systems that are able to persuade people to act together for the greater good?
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I don't know if you've seen this, but I was actually having a talk with a friend of mine this morning about this. And when the pandemic first hit and everything shut down, I read a lot of articles and I talked to a lot of, especially business leaders and some government leaders who said, this isn't the time to focus on our leadership. We're just struggling to survive. You know, people just need to do their jobs and take care of themselves. And we all need to go our own ways and be independent in this difficult time. And I was just thinking, I've been thinking that's completely the wrong prescription. Don't you think?
Well, of course. I mean, after 9/11, the New York Times went and found CEOs that are doing business in the Twin Towers. Nobody knew what to do after that kind of catastrophe. Nobody was handed out on a handbook as to how to deal with a pandemic. So what they went back is they asked people, what are the things that you actually did do after the Twin Towers collapse? What was taking place? And here are the leadership lessons of 9/11 that are completely congruent with what Bob Greenleaf wrote about. First, leaders need to have a non-anxious presence. Leadership sets a tone. The opposite of reflection is reaction. We've had way too much reaction, way too many highly anxious leaders over and against those people who've been able to sit in front of the camera and speak calmly, tell people the truth and say, this is where we need to go. So you have to have a non-anxious presence. You can't overreact. Second, you have to tell people the truth. Tell people what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear. And I think that we've had too much political pandering, wanting to tell people what they want to hear rather than what is it that we need to hear. Let the science lead. Tell the truth. These are the facts. Third, put people first. And what have we seen happening in terms of our healthcare systems? I saw last night a doctor who's been working for 250 straight days in Houston. He can't take a day off because there's nobody to take his place. People first, putting people that he's caring for above members of his own family. And then what's most important in this last thing, and this is what you got to earlier, let's get to work, and let's get to work now.
So I get the impression that Tom and I could talk to each other for hours about this, but I don't want to leave out because there's 44 other people in this room. Yeah. So feel free to unmute yourself, or if you're uncomfortable with that, you could just type it in the chat. What do you have to say? What do you have to add? Do you have a great story that might be inspiring to someone else on the call? Have you encountered one of these myths yourself? How have you experienced servant leadership or not during the coronavirus pandemic? Please feel free to jump in. I've been talking, I'm running out of breath. Or maybe everyone prefers just sitting quietly.
That is what we experienced last time.
Mhm.
They want to observe other people's thoughts. I'll toss some in here. As a practical matter, I think a big element of this is what I call the middle letter of sin. The I. It hinders a lot of people's perspectives, what is underlying their reason for doing what they're doing, or it influences. And it may be different on different elements. It could be, I want the people to think well of me, so I don't want to talk about anything negative. It could be, my dad told me that it's all about profit. That's all there is. And so I can't let go of that. It may be that I want customers to love me, so I'm going to do anything to satisfy customers. But the mix of the group, the balance of it all, may be very difficult, as already noted. And you actually have to have them all, or you have to have people working with you that address those elements, and they can trust you. And trust is that huge, huge piece that allows for mistakes, experiments. I don't know of any company that celebrates mistakes. Some people will allow it and say it's okay, but nobody really accepts it. You know of any companies that celebrate mistakes?
I know of a story that was told about Bob Greenleaf when he was at AT&T. That actually brings to mind that if he encountered a leader, or a manager, I should say, who was a little bit too heavy on that I, who was a little bit too self-focused, who was a little bit too sure that, I'm the boss because I'm the best, so I just need to do this myself and not delegate it, he would actually tell people to let them fail. So that they could experience that failure and learn from it, both from a cognitive sense, okay, here's what I got wrong, but also from a more affective sense, boy, maybe I shouldn't have been too sure of myself. So I think Greenleaf would argue that failure should be celebrated sometimes. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've never learned bigger lessons than I have from my mistakes.
Well, early on in a career, there's no question, the way to really learn is to watch somebody fail. Then they really get it. You can tell them what to do, how to do it. You can get them to follow a procedure, but then they don't think. But if you, early in their 20s, I'm thinking, first couple of years, if they're in a management training program, if they're, and the ones you for sure want to let do that are the ones that are assertive, have opinions, and that is the way they hone their skill set. And I've allowed that in my own practice, but I didn't practice with every person in the company. One person said it very succinctly. In this company, they'll let you break your leg, but they won't let you fall off the cliff. And that was a young woman, maybe mid-20s. And she was trying to explain the culture. And then there's people that just have been so traumatized, not traumatized, but have had so many experiences that are the opposite of servant leadership, that they spend years trying to figure out what you're doing. I have several people that it's about after 5 years, these are experienced people, and they would say, well, Peter, I knew in the first year or two that what you said is what you did. But I was trying to figure out the angle. What's the angle? What's the angle? I spent 5 years on this angle thing. And after 5 years, I just want to tell you, I now understand there is no angle. And I had two very experienced, very intelligent, actually, folks. One had worked for a company, national in scope, and he was one of the last employees finishing up all their problems. They had been in 3 generations, started before the Depression, and they eventually went out of business. And he lost his pension on top of it. And he knew this company wasn't straight. They had a particular way of doing business. Competent folks, but not straight, as we sometimes refer to them. And so he had all that stigma, really kind of hell he went through it towards the end of the company. Promises made, not kept, lots of them, to keep people going and to limit liabilities. So I don't know. In my own case, I always prayed every day before I started, because there was always somebody that was driving me mad because I couldn't move them from point A to point B. But then they retire and they do something that is completely contrary to what they were fighting with you about. Thinking of one case, United Way. I'm not giving the United Way. All kinds of excuses why he didn't want to give any money to the United Way, which I consider the easiest way of validating your giving. It's a well communicated what they do. And he fought with me. Finally, he started giving something. He retired in his mid-50s. He started in his 20s, was a COO, and he wrote down that the richest thing he ever learned in the company was giving. And every year, he just can't wait to do his giving because it's just a rich part of his life. Then he was brought in to help out some division that needed some help. And in that division, who had never given anything to anybody, he challenged them all to match their giving. For every dollar they put up, he personally put up another dollar to get them going. And his boss was just astounded and shared that story with me. I actually have more than one story like this. One of them I just finished after 41 years. This is not in the company, it's just with a person. The richest thing that happened to me this year. So we're not in charge is the message. We're not in charge. Where's the heart? What's the focus? Are you being responsible? Do people trust you? Those are all attributes that are helpful. But ultimately, it all starts with yourself. Where are you? Now that's a speech. My apology.
I think it ties into a question that we got from Al Sherwin Alpha. That I would actually, I think Tom might have the most experience on this. He asked, is it possible for a leader to shift his leadership style? I think the answer is yes, because there's lots of different leadership styles. I know I've read of over 70 different leadership styles. Sure, it's possible. Some are harder than others. Servant leadership may be the hardest of all, and it takes some things. But I know Tom's done a lot of work and a lot of talks about this, so I think I'll leave this one to him.
Well, I think that's what is it we believe about human beings? Carol Zwick, we have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. When I have a fixed mindset, I don't believe other people can change, and I don't need to change as well. But when I have a growth mindset, what I'm open to is continuous change and feedback. But I have to make a conscious decision on that. And there's two ways in which we can grow and change. One is feedback. So who are the people that we invite to give us honest feedback in terms of who tells us the truth about ourselves? Who fills in the blind spots? Who are we humble enough to accept their opinion of us? Dave Scogan said, you want to change? Give a blank sheet of paper to somebody that you love and have them write down everything about you they would change if they could. Ask a 15-year-old what they think of you. They'll tell you. So where are we asking for feedback? The person does this better than anybody else is Dick Pieper. He asks for feedback on everything. Second, the way in which we grow and we change and develop is by reflection. What does the research show us? Many leaders do not spend nearly enough time in reflection. And the greatest temptation of every leader today is distraction, being pulled apart, running away from. What's really difficult about this leadership stuff now during the pandemic, when you have to spend time in solitude, things that you've been avoiding for years are coming to the fore. So what is happening? People are spending more time in solitude and isolation, having to face themselves. And what are they experiencing? Levels of trauma that they had early on in their lives that they never wanted to face, but kept themselves busy, occupied, distracted, if you will. And now coming face to face with that. And when you do, you begin to embrace that, and you begin to embrace your humanity. That's where real change takes place. Embracing not only our shadow, but our light, what we have to offer as well as our limitations. So one of the things that's really critical about Greenleaf, and he talk about what's really difficult about servant leadership, is when he says that the servant leader needs to be a healer. Well, I cannot be a healer looking in terms of healing the wounds of other people unless I've done that kind of introspection in terms of myself.
Just to add my own perspective on the question of how do you change. Before I was a professor, I was in the corporate world, and I worked for several years with AT&T, which was where Greenleaf started it all. But at the time I was there, and they would happily tell you this, they were not a servant leadership company. They did not train servant leadership. It had gone by the wayside. I went to so many leadership trainings, and this stuff was never mentioned. It was all profit, profit, profit. And you know, that was my first job out of college. And in college, I wasn't taught servant leadership. So I needed, obviously, one of Tom's classes. So I didn't even know, you know, that is there any way that this servant leader, I didn't even know what servant leadership was, right? But I did realize that the way I'd been leading throughout my AT&T career, like, it was dissatisfying to me. Something was missing, and I could tell it wasn't as effective as, you know, I'd always heard leadership was supposed to be, as it should be. I wasn't happy with my outputs. So I started reading a lot. And that was when I discovered, right before I started my next job, the next stage of my career, I discovered Greenleaf, and I was just blown away. Like, first, wow, this was at AT&T, but second, this is so different from anything I've ever heard before. And so I wanted to try it, but it was so different. Like, my heart was sort of in the right place, sort of not. I'm still not sure if it fully is or if it ever will be, but I wanted to be better, right? So what I caught myself doing a lot at my second employer, Schwann's, was falling back into the old habits of management, of supervision, of not being as caring as perhaps as I should, of not taking as much time, of not reflecting, so on and so forth, not being the healer that Tom was just talking about. And so I don't know if this would work for anybody else. I don't know if this is a good thing, but you know what? How I really started, I kind of faked it. You know, I would start asking myself, with all due respect to my Lord and Savior, what would Greenleaf do when I was in a situation? Okay, if he was in here, what would his book tell me to do? And sometimes I didn't feel it all the way, but over time, just taking a little more time with employees, spending more time with them, doing things that I didn't like, but put them first. You know, as difficult as that was, over time, that became less an act and more a habit. And over time, it became less a habit and hopefully a little bit more of a part of who I am. So I do think it's possible to change. It's very difficult. It requires a lot of work. Most people don't have the guts for it. Men or women, doesn't matter, old or young, experienced or inexperienced. Change is hard. And especially when this is not the type of leadership that the world practices, but it is the type of leadership that the world calls for, and it needs, as Greenleaf said, the pioneers to lead the way. So I just my own opinion. Yeah, it's possible, but it's really difficult, and sometimes it takes a lot of study. It takes a lot of reminders. It takes a lot of reflection. Here's what I did today that was right. And here's what I did today that was wrong. And reflection in terms of writing it down, keeping a journal. Greenleaf wrote a lot about that too. You know, here's what I did today that really worked. I want to do that again. Here's what I did today that when I think back on it, it wasn't effective. I'm ashamed of it. I don't think I was really honoring my employees by doing this, or it was right for the customers. It's a lot of work. That's my perspective on this.
You know, there's also just simply a growth that goes on. I mean, it's a building block. Your heart may be in the right place, but how do you do it? And how do you do all these incremental steps? The analogy I use is growing oak trees. They're solid, they're strong, they can persevere in storms and droughts and everything else. But actually, you don't just drop yourself in and do all these things that have been outlined that we know are right. So how long does it take?
Hi. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Dana Morrison. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I work for a school system, K through 12. And I love listening to every meeting. That I don't even know how I found out about this, but it's been incredible. I would say, as teachers and educators, the one thing that you spoke about this morning that is key is just that idea of reflection, especially for the pandemic, with all of us going through all the different changes from whether we're in school or hybrid or face-to-face, and just how many children and students are going through such a difficult time right now and navigating through that, and just this constant state of reflection. And then for me, as an educator for 32 years, and now I'm in the, I recruit for new teachers, it really has been important to look at people with all the different layers that they come with, because what we see on the outside is not always what we delve into when we look on the inside. So it's been a really challenging time, but it also has been a very opportunistic time of what education is going to look like. And as we reflect, and I work also in an urban school system that has so many different variables that are just going on. But I from food service to transportation to teachers to students, and just the importance of reflection, and just the other one that comes to mind is just kindness, and taking the time to have empathy to really delve into what people need and what people don't even realize that they do need. And anyway, I just wanted to unmute myself and tell you how much I appreciate your words of encouragement and just the things that you share, and just how important they are to me in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I appreciate that.
Hello, Dana. I want you to know that I am from Louisiana and that I
Awesome.
graduated from Louisiana State University, and I did some
Yay.
Baton Rouge schools years ago. So it's great to hear from you and see you online.
Oh, awesome.
I miss those sprawling oak trees so much, and especially the weather as I look out my Buffalo window and see all the snow out here.
Well, it's about 60 and it's beautiful outside, and I'm looking at a camellia bush. So,
Oh, quit bragging.
yes.
But you know, one thing I was thinking about while you talked, I did some work with a school system, a public school system, and urban, and about the size of Baton Rouge. You can probably guess what city I'm talking about, but I'm not going to say it just in case. And one thing that that a principal said to me that I thought was an amazing example of servant leadership, and it was so true in the rest of my interviews, it was that teachers, there's not a lot of people who get into teaching for the money. Right? The teachers, they want to make a difference for their students' families, for their futures. But it's so easy for teachers to forget that in the daily grind. It's so easy for it to become, okay, well, we've got to do this assessment. I've got to grade these tests. I got another day in front of me. I got to do another lesson plan. I got to get this ready for the substitute. And we see that same thing in healthcare, where people they get into it for the right reasons, but they forget about the impact they're making because they're getting so worn down. And I think it's even worse in COVID, right? When you don't have that face-to-face right in front of you. See, it's harder to see the light come on in a kid's eyes when it's over Zoom, right? So this principal said to me, it's so important in every single interaction that I have with my teachers, with my staff, that I remind them, hey, you made a difference in this kid's life today. We need that constant re-encouragement when things get rough. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but that I thought that was incredibly meaningful, that we just need the reminder that, hey, you really are making a difference. I think that's something a servant leader would talk about a lot.
Yes, we have the power to make a difference every day in so many ways. And even just the people who come across you in the office and different things. And like I said, just so many different things going on with people, and it takes just such a small amount. And I think I have to wear a mask too in the office, and just even with mask, it's so hard to connect with people, but we've just got to keep trying. But I truly think that what we do, and the words of encouragement that we have, and the smiles that we make, and just the efforts that we put forth for people are invaluable. And so again, I just wanted to unmute myself and show myself, because I just think what this servant leadership meetings have done for me personally have been just incredible. And I'm just very grateful. So thank y'all so much.
That's great feedback. Thank you for unmuting. Yeah, it makes me think. I got an email from an angry reader of something I wrote. I was writing about COVID, and I was talking about how we're really in danger during COVID of forgetting about this personal interaction we have to have, because it's harder to do virtually. It's harder to do through a mask. And I wrote that there's so many of us who are like, okay, well, I got to take care of myself. They got to take care of themselves. And I said, no, that's dangerous. That's how you lose people. That's how they go to other companies. That's how they lose the connection. That's how they forget the difference they're making. And he wrote back to me and he said, you know, you're kind of living in the past here, and the new technological future, especially with COVID, the new normal, everything's going to be virtual. There's not even going to be really much of any leader-follower relationships. And that's going to be a good thing, he said, because that doesn't allow politics to pop up. Then people can't suck up to the boss. I wrote 5 different versions of my reply before I finally got one that I thought was the right tone and sent it up. And I said, you know, part of me hopes you're wrong, but a bigger part of me hopes you're right, that we're going to be just fine. But every time in human history where organizational leaders have tried to reduce their employees to cogs in a machine that don't need personal touches, that don't need relationships, every time we've tried that, going back to scientific management at the very least, we failed miserably, because that's not how human beings work. That's not who we are. And geez, if you think that's going to stop politics, I think it'd be quite the opposite. But it's really easy in times of crisis, like COVID, like racial unrest, to turn inward and say, okay, I got to take care of myself, and everyone else has to take care of themselves. That's what normal people do, and that's what supervisors do, and that's what managers do. But it's the complete opposite of what the servant leader is called to be. If you call yourself a leader, if you want to be a servant leader, it's your duty to make sure those relationships stay strong and that everyone's okay. You got to put others first. So easy to say, so hard to do.
Hello, Sonia Mao. Could I say a few words?
Please.
Questions is what we seek.
Hello? I'm totally inspired by what I'm hearing. And I wanted to share 2 stories with you, because I was a manager for 30 years and definitely seeking a better way to manage, because I knew there had to be one, but I just couldn't seem to find it. And then I discovered servant leadership. And the nut of it is, I retired and discovered someone else was starting a leadership program in our local town of Bloomington, Bloomington, Illinois. And I was able to help create the servant leadership philosophy behind it. And we have just had the most wonderful experiences for the last 10 years. And so I guess I'll share 3 things. A short one, we had a Marine who took this leadership program, and it's a 9-month program. So there is time to share with the co-participants what you've learned. And one day he said, you know, when I came in, I thought I was a good leader. Then I realized I'm not. And, you know, half the class wanted to say, no, you're fine. But of course, he knew he wasn't, because he never listened. He just barked orders. So he said, now he's a civilian and he's working at a utility company, right? So he said, I'm going to try next time asking my people questions instead of telling them. So he did. And he came back. He said, you know what? It works. They told me a lot more. There's only one problem. They can't stop talking now. And I thought, how beautiful that he's created a relationship by following something, by listening, and they responded. So he's creating a great team. My own experience, the second experience is
Sonia, just to let you know, you have 45 seconds to
45 seconds. Okay.
Where everyone will return.
Yeah, I had a difficult employee, and she was on the verge of being fired by my boss. So he asked me to take her, and I did. And I did what you guys said, but it was very hard, just like you've mentioned. And it turns out that she changed, and I learned. And when she retired, she invited me to her retirement party. I really didn't want to go because she was such a tough employee. Her husband said, you've got to stay. He toasted me as the best manager she ever had. So there's a reward at the end of the rainbow. But it is, as you said, hard work. But you know what? It's satisfying work. So I think I'm just totally committed to servant leadership in our program. And after I hear this type of discussion, I'm inspired again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And thank you, Jim, for your presentation. So in our last portion of our session, we will move into our Q&A session, where I've consolidated some of the questions asked throughout the chat, and I will provide Jim with several questions. to gain some insight, some further insight into his perspective of servant leadership. All right, our first question. Jim, how would you say you mentioned constructive tension in your presentation? How can servant leaders begin to create spaces of constructive tension in their organizations?
Well, that could be a whole other webinar. Heck, that could be a whole semester of college courses. But the first part, I'll give you two. I mean, the first part are just being brave and framing the message correctly. And here's what I mean by that. Research shows that the vast majority of managers are a little bit timid, a little bit cowardly. They want to be popular. They want people to like them. That's a basic human need, the need for affiliation. We all want to be liked. We want to be the popular boss. We want the boss that people brag about, the boss that everybody likes. So we think we've just got to be, we've got to always be nice. We can't give them any negative feedback. That might hurt their feelings. That might make them angry at me. I'll never forget the very first management position I had as a senior resident assistant in a dormitory at Louisiana State University. I had to do my first performance evaluations. And when I looked at my staff, I realized most of them were terrible. Didn't realize it was my fault, but I realized that most of them were terrible, but they were my friends. So I can't give them bad performance reviews. And I'll never forget, I thought to myself, here's a win-win. I'll give everyone a great performance review. They'll be happy. I'll be happy. Everyone wins. That's terrible. That's bad leadership. That's bad management. No one's growing. The organization's suffering. But the reason for that was I thought that it was either you be nice to them and tell them you're doing great, or you yell at them and tell them you're doing bad, not realizing that you come out of it, hey, let's work together to make this organization better. Let's work together to make you better. So first step is just being brave and realizing, you know, you can say this, you need to say this. The best leaders do say these things. They do build these tension. And the second is framing it right. I'm not doing this to put you in your place. I'm not doing this to prove that I'm smarter than you. I'm not doing this because I've got the big fancy title and you don't. I'm not doing this because I can. I'm doing this because I think you can be even better than you are now. I see your strengths. I see your weaknesses. Let's work together to get you where you want to be. And the only way you're going to get where you want to be is by making you better. And I'd love to hear what folks like Tom have to say about that. But that's my first thought.
I really enjoyed that answer. I don't think Tom could have matched up with that. That was a beautiful answer. My next question for you is in the context of military. You spoke to military leadership. Can you speak to how a leader can begin to enhance the morality and motivation of leaders in that capacity?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I don't think I understood.
In terms of military leadership, as in terms of the presentation, you had spoke to servant leaders in that space as well. Can you kind of speak to how they can enhance morality and motivation of their soldiers and or those they're leading?
Well, sure. Let me say, I don't come to this from a position of credibility because I've never been in the military. So if what I'm about to say doesn't sound right, then by all means correct me and educate me. I've done some work with the Coast Guard, and I've done a lot of interviews with them, talked to them a lot about this. So hopefully at least there's some basis for credibility and legitimacy in all of this. But I don't think it's all that different. Someone asked me in a private message while we were in the breakouts, what was it about Chamberlain's speech that was so motivating to people that made those 120 men sign up to fight the next day at Gettysburg? And I wasn't there. I can't say for sure, but I think the first thing was this. These were men who, according to the historical records, had been coerced every step of the way. Ever since they'd agreed to sign the contract, they'd been forced to fight. They'd been forced to stay longer than they felt they should have, based on what was their impression of when they signed the contract. They thought that they would be off a year early. People had been pointing guns at them the whole time. And everybody's saying, you have to fight, you have to fight, you have to do this, or you will be court-martialed, you will go AWOL, you will be shot. And then along comes Josh Chamberlain, who says, you know what, I'm not going to coerce you. I want you to do this because you believe in your heart it's right. I want you to do this because you want to, because you believe you can make a difference in the world by it. And that was just a very different approach. Research shows that even people who say they don't give a damn about morality and helping other people, they do. Sometimes they don't even know it. Sometimes it's subconscious. But they do. Research shows that managers who talk about, here's what we are doing that is making the world a better place motivates everybody, not just the people who go out and volunteer on the weekends or you know, give a lot to the United Way. It motivates everyone. So, I mean, again, that's a whole other webinar. There's a whole science of motivation, right? Around what makes people want to do things, which is what I think leadership is. Back to Dwight Eisenhower, leadership is getting people to want to do things. How do you get that? Well, you get them to believe in something bigger than themselves. You get them to care about something bigger than themselves. You get them to see the value in something else. You give them a goal that motivates them. You talk to them about fairness and justice. You make them believe that they can do something, that something will happen if they do it, and then you make sure that that's something that they want. I'm sorry, I could talk your ear off. I hope that's the beginning of an answer.
No, I appreciate that answer. The next question is, can you explain the importance of servant leadership in higher education as a current professor?
Boy, I better be careful. My dean could be on this call.
Yeah.
I think in higher education, we talked a little bit about something similar in the breakouts. In nonprofits, especially, places like education, places like healthcare, certainly my experience in higher ed, people don't get into education because they want to make a lot of money. Right? They get into it for different reasons. We usually it's because, you know, we're motivated by this. We want to make a difference in people's lives. And by the way, I'm going to interrupt my answer. I'm seeing amazing stuff going through the chat. So make sure you're reading that or saving that.
Me as well. It's beautiful.
People have some amazing insights that they're sharing in the chats right now. People get into this stuff like higher ed for the right reasons, but it's easy for us to forget because we're so focused on publish or perish, or we're so focused on, oh, I got to teach another class. I got to do another lesson plan. I've got to grade. I've got 60 papers, 60 essays in my inbox that I need to grade. And this wears you down. And in the daily grind, we tend to forget why we got started in this, and we stop noticing the difference we're making. So I say a lot that, especially in a non-for-profit like higher ed, the servant leader's job is to remind people of the difference you're making, because that's going to motivate them. That's going to inspire them. In higher ed, just like in education, I mean, we are setting the course for the next generation, right? What could be more important than that? Going back to something I said earlier, what could be more noble? What could be more a cause worth doing than setting the course for the next generation, trying to set them right? And trying to do that right, you know, with facts and not opinions, as Tom was talking about earlier. Not just trying to make them into carbon copies of ourselves, but getting them to think critically and question. You know, Greenleaf wrote a lot about this. Servant leader realizes I'm not always right. Just because I'm in a position of leadership, that doesn't mean I know everything. And this is something that I actually tell my classes, and I would encourage any education folks to do. I tell my classes, argue with me, debate me. Tell me when I just said something that you believe is wrong, that doesn't match with your personal experience. If you think I'm giving bad advice, then the whole class needs to know, maybe you're right and I'm wrong and I could learn something about that. We got to think critically. Don't just accept what a professor tells you. Think it through. You know, and they do this in my class. And to be honest, 9 times out of 10, it's like, well, have you thought about this? And it turns out that I was right or the research was right. But there's 1 time out of 10 where they're absolutely right. And wow, that's something that your textbook authors never thought about. And I never thought about. And, you know, maybe I've actually written papers. I've written research papers with my students based on these moments in class. So I think it's really important to let students think critically. And again, I'm meandering, so I'll shut up now, but I hope that was a decent answer.
No, it was. And it sounds like you're creating constructive tension spaces in your own classrooms. My next question for you is, what do you suggest if the CEO or senior leader is not a servant leader? How do you make progress in that organization?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. And, you know, I would love to hear people's thoughts on that, because I've struggled with, I personally struggled with that in the corporate world, where one of the companies I worked in, I was trying to do this servant leadership stuff, and it was awesome. And it was so obvious that the C-suite didn't buy into it. And unfortunately, the simple answer is, you know, some people just aren't ready for that message, and you are not in a position to tell the CEO that they're doing this wrong. You know, you got to give it time. You got to wait for people to come around. You know, the business roundtable, I talked about the 200 CEOs. You know, they never would have said that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. This is society finally catching up to us, right? So maybe the CEO is just behind the ball. If not, there's something really powerful called behavioral modeling or social learning, where you can be a role model from any level of the company. Is it going to work its way up to the CEO level? Probably not, but maybe it's worth a shot. Even if it can't work its way up, it can work its way through your department, through your division. I can say personally that in one of the businesses I've worked with that was absolutely not a servant-led organization, we made it a servant leader division. And we had the best commitment in the company, the highest engagement scores when those surveys came out, and some of the best financial results as well. So that's a really hard question, and I'd love to hear. I mean, I see someone saying in the chat right now, even if the leader in your organization is not a servant leader, you can still act based on your core values. Absolutely right. And even if they're not sure about what you're doing, I'll tell you this. If you have spread that to as a part of your team's culture, because that's the servant leader's job, right? It's a real part of your team's culture, division's culture. You're going to succeed, and they can't argue with that.
Right? Fostering and cultivating. Absolutely. My next question for you is, how can you convince leaders to walk the talk in terms of servant leadership? I think that's our main question we get. So I want to hear your perspective.
Again, I'm no expert at this, and I'm no servant leader myself. So
I would beg to differ.
You can beg all you want. I can beg too. I think there's a lot of really good stuff going on in the chat and a lot of really brilliant people here. But I mean, just from my perspective, how do you get them to walk the talk? Well, that implies one of two different situations. Are these people that really do have the heart of a servant, and they're afraid to let it out? Are these people who don't have the heart of a servant, and we just want them to become servant leaders? So I'll speak to both of those. In the latter case, if they don't have the heart of a servant, there is disagreement on whether or not you can fake servant leadership. Like there is a list of leadership competencies. People say, well, you can pretend to care. I kind of struggle with that. I think people can see through that, at least given time. Narcissistic leadership, we see a lot of that. But at the same side, there are minor things. If you just start doing these three things, that's even if I honestly do believe this. If you told a leader who didn't care about the community, start researching how what your team does affects the community and talking to them about it. Even if they start out not caring about it, by doing that research, I believe they will eventually come to care about it. And talking about these things enough, forcing yourself to becomes a habit. And research shows that by forcing ourselves to do things we don't want to do, creating habits that can actually change our personality in the very long term. So it's possible over time that you can develop the heart of the servant leader, but it's not a magic pill. And you can't just pretend, well, I'm going to pretend today I care about customers when I didn't before, that that I really put others first. How do you pretend with things like that? But you can start by with those habits. And I have personally had a lot of luck with getting people who didn't give a damn about servant leadership interested in servant leadership by telling them that, hey, you want to make money, you got to start caring, or you got to at least start acting like you care. And maybe that's the first step. I don't know. For those who are afraid to let the heart of the servant leader out, someone said this in the chat earlier. There's a great term called psychological safety that every organization needs, that every servant leader needs to build. It's a culture basically that says we can be ourselves, that we can do things different, that we can come out with crazy ideas. Nobody will be offended. Nobody will punish us. We can try new things. How many organizations have you worked at that were really like that? Because I can only think of a couple, but that's the servant leader's job. You're making an open mind. I have a friend who actually argues that the best servant leaders are the ones who tell their followers, you don't have to be a servant leader like me. Do what you believe in your heart is right, and then that they'll get to that. But great questions, all good questions. And if you're really interested in this stuff, I'm going to again say, look at what we've got going on in the chat. We've got some amazing ideas going through there that are very distracting as I try to answer your questions.
Well, we can close on this question. This is our final question today. In developing, actually, I rather this question. So during these unprecedented times, how would you suggest servant leaders help motivate and encourage others to employ leadership roles?
You do one of the most powerful things a leader can do, and one of the reasons why servant leadership is so powerful is doing the unexpected. That's what social learning theory says, and that's at the basis of servant leadership. The world is not a servant-led world. The world does not expect us to have servant leaders. The world is looking for something else entirely. So by being servant leaders, even in these crazy times, there are a lot of people who think servant leadership is generally a good thing, but you have to abandon it during crises like pandemics or racial unrest because you don't have time for that. You've got to really focus on what matters. Servant leader says, well, yeah, you got to focus on what matters, and that's our people. That's our customers. That's our community. Because what do we have if we don't have our people, customers, and communities? So right now, what the world is telling us is that we need to withdraw. Unfortunately, this is a subconscious message of social distancing and masks, which is like, we have to separate and we have to take care of ourselves. I'm not speaking against social distancing and masks. Please don't get me wrong. I'm saying it sends a bad subconscious message to us that I think has kind of bubbled up over the past year that no, we take care of ourselves. Other people might be infected. They're going to do their work. I'm going to do mine. You be there for them. You be there for them every bit as much as you were before the crisis, and maybe even more, because now is the time when they need it. Whether that's a call, whether that's on Zoom, you're not just assuming they're fine. You're not assuming that everything's fine in their personal lives exactly the way it was. You're not assuming that everything's fine with their kids. You're not assuming that everything's fine with their family, that everyone's healthy. You're asking these questions. You're being the person that people would be comfortable going to you if they had a personal problem. That's one of the big questions I ask to separate managers from servant leaders. Would you go to your boss if you had a personal problem? Society is calling for us right now to kind of separate and be hands off and take care of ourselves. And if you're not doing that, you're surprising people. And when you're surprising people, they're remembering it. You're making a difference. They're rethinking their own mindsets. That's what I think. We surprise people. We'd be there for them even when we don't have to be. That's servant leadership, right?
Agreed. So in your closing words, Dr. Lemoine, what would you like the people to leave with?
I would, what would I like to leave you with? There's been so much good stuff. And again, just looking at the chat, I don't think I said most of it, but here's the thing. If you really care about this stuff, like if you want to be better at it, well, let me start here. If you think you're awesome at this, you're not. Okay. If you think you've got a long way to go, then you're on the right path. And there are a lot of resources out there. There's some real subject matter experts on this Zoom who you could connect with at the Servant Leader Summit. I guess I could say that, but beyond that, who've written a lot of great stuff, who've got a lot of videos. I've got a TED Talk on servant leadership you can find online. There's so many resources out there. I like to tell Mr. Pieper a lot, this is a golden age for research on servant leadership. There's so much peer-reviewed evidence that this really works and it works great. So educate yourself and journal. We talked a lot about reflection. Here's what I did today. Write it down. I liked that I did this. I felt proud of myself when I did this. This didn't work. I'm so ashamed of myself that I did this. Writing things down helps us change our behavior. Greenleaf wrote a lot about the power of reflection. So if you want this to be, if you're like, wow, I want to be that kind of leader. I want to be that kind of boss. I want people to think of me that way. Then you really have to work at it. It's not enough just to come to a couple of webinars, right? You got to keep reading, you got to keep writing, you got to ask people. I think Tom said this earlier. You got to ask people, what are my weaknesses? Where am I missing the ball? And you got to be open to that harsh feedback. It's a long journey, but hey, we're all starting it. And the International Servant Leader Summit provides a great community for us all to support each other so we can do it together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for attending our pre-summit series, and we hope to see you in January for our next. Thank you so much.